So you have to be very careful when you set up an incentive system to make sure you're incentivizing the right thing. So let me point this out. A wrong thing to do is to make your metric the size of the pile. In other words, if I am encouraging everybody who's a senior person in the organization to get out their briefcase and dump it into the repository, my key metric is what? How high is the pile? And those of you who've really understood the concept of the crapper principle are saying, well, that could be just a what? Pile of crap. What should the metric of this community be? Now, I don't know if you can relate in India the way we do in the United States to that little boy in the front of the picture. He's supposed to be a paper boy. In other words, every afternoon he gets the paper from someplace and goes and delivers it to all the households that are represented by the other folks in that circle. And his mother says to him, it gets dark at 5 o'clock. I know you want this job. I know you like getting the extra money. I like that you're getting all this opportunity to show initiative and all that sense of maturity and whatnot. But if you can't get home before it gets dark, I'm fearful, and you cannot keep your paper out. So the neighborhood wants to make sure this good little paper boy is able to keep his job, deliver the papers to them, but the mother says you have to be home by dark. What should the proper metric of this neighborhood or this community be? How can we help the paper boy be able to deliver the newspaper and get home by 5 o'clock? Maybe one of those other two fellows just to the paper boy's left was just a paper boy a year or two ago. Well, it looks like maybe 5 or 10 years ago, and could help the paper boy. The question is, what is the proper metric for a community? Is it how high is the pile of crap, or is it whether or not the paper boy can deliver the newspaper more effectively and get home in time to keep the job and be a good paper boy as opposed to who might come along next? You have to be very careful when you set your metrics. We definitely want to reward and incentivize good performance, but we have to make sure the performance is what we really want. And how high is the pile of crap is not the performance metric we should be interested in. The performance metric in this particular scenario should be, does the little paper boy get the papers delivered dry, on time, and get home in time before it turns dark? That's a very important principle. We probably ought to call it a second principle of KM, but I haven't come up with a good name, not one that you'll remember quite as well as the crapper principle, but there needs to be a second name, and that has something to do with the metrics and the real advantage that you get out of your community. The metric has to be tied to results, not just to how high is the pile of crap. Okay, for each one of these diagrams, you don't have it on your slides, but there are some weaknesses, some potential weaknesses of them. The first diagram, the one where there was a subject matter expert, some of the questions you might ask are, what if the expert is not immediately available? What if the expert's too busy or not known? What if the expert retires or resigns? And then worst case, motivation. What if the expert doesn't feel obligated to share knowledge? And in this model that you're looking at right now, the knowledge sharing model, there are some potential weaknesses associated with it too. And that is, how do you know who has the knowledge? How do you validate the knowledge? How do you ensure a proper balance between the givers and takers, which is what we were just describing? The giver being this potential senior person who can dump his briefcase out and build a pile of crap, when in fact the giver ought to be those other two gentlemen on the left-hand side who have had a newspaper route recently, and they're giving it to the person who is the taker, who in this case is the paper boy. In fact, I've actually heard people in the late 90s and even up until very recently say, we want to dissuade people from just being takers. We want to make sure everybody is a knowledge sharer and a giver. And you can see the unintended consequences of such a strategy. You end up building piles of crap and never getting the kinds of results that are totally possible with knowledge management. So how do you ensure a proper balance between the givers and takers? And what if the need of knowledge is not available, not part of the communal knowledge base? All right, moving on from that, let's look at what a community of practice is all about. The principle on the next slide says, collaboration must provide solutions, which we call results, or it's of very little value. You wouldn't want to, as a company, be spending much money on promoting communities, enriching communities, fostering collaboration, if you in fact were not providing solutions. And here's what a solution might look like. Somebody, like the little paper boy, here depicted as a person sitting at their desk, has a problem. They need to in some way contact their community. And the community has a conversation in some way or another, virtual or otherwise, or has knowledge bases, and provides a solution to that person's problem. And if your community is not providing solutions, then it's not doing what it should be doing. On the next slide, I have a depiction of something that most of you will recognize. The first couple of slides was 9.2, you see up in the right-hand corner, called Connect. We're connecting people together to help solve problems. The next part is Connect and Collect. So we're going to move now into Collect, the collect side of the coin. Does anybody recognize that piece of equipment? That piece of equipment is Gutenberg's printing press. Yeah, more than just a printing press, because printing presses did exist before Gutenberg, but what Gutenberg was able to do was create movable type. And that led to an explosion in the production of printed materials. And the collect side of the Connect and Collect is all about making, not necessarily printed, because today we talk about both printed, which is hard copy, and virtual materials, but some way or another codifying the knowledge that is being shared, that tacit knowledge, making it explicit. Some might say that one of the greatest inventors of the entire second millennium was Gutenberg, because most of the Industrial Revolution was people who were benefiting from the knowledge that they got from the books that were being circulated that weren't possible before the movable type printing press. So Gutenberg needs a pat on the back for probably being a key factor in starting the Industrial Revolution. And some might say today that the entire Internet is just nothing more than a modern-day version of what Gutenberg enabled in 1454 or 56. In fact, one of the expressions that's important here is an old Chinese proverb. I would expect there's one in India similarly, and it says, "The palest ink is better than the best memory." Okay, I'm going to move on from then the Gutenberg and the printing press to a slide that you do not have. I'm going to read a brief 2 paragraphs from Sherlock Holmes' A Study in Scarlet. And this was written well over 100 years ago. And here's what he had to say. Listen to it for its relevance to today. "I consider that a man's brain originally is like a little empty attic. You have to stock it with such furniture as you choose. A fool takes in all the lumber of every sort that he comes across, so that the knowledge which might be useful to him gets crowded out, or at best is jumbled up with a lot of other things, so that he has difficulty in laying his hands upon it. Now, the skillful workman is very careful indeed as to what he takes into his brain attic. He will have nothing but the tools which may help him in doing his work, but of these he has a large assortment, and all in the most perfect order. It is a mistake to think that the little room has elastic walls and can distend to any extent. Depend upon it, there comes a time when for every addition of knowledge you forget something that you knew before. It is of the highest importance not to have the useless facts elbowing out the useful ones." If you study what Holmes said, that is Sir Arthur Conan Doyle said for Holmes, you might come up with another principle. Let's call it the Sherlock Holmes attic principle. It has a corollary to the Crapper principle, as you can probably imagine, those of you who have been listening carefully. Next slide that you don't have there, I'm going to tell you a little about Holmes telling a confirming story. Remember Sherlock Holmes' buddy, Dr. Watson? Well, Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson went on a camping trip. And after a while, they lay down. Oh, here, you have the text of it. Very good. They lay down for the night and went to sleep. Later, Holmes awoke and nudged his faithful friend, saying, "Hey, Watson, look up. Tell me what you see." And Watson says, "I see millions of stars." And Holmes replies, "What does that tell you?" And Watson goes on to give the following. I'll read along with you there. Watson pondered and replied, "Astronomically, it tells me millions of galaxies, potentially billions of planets." Keep up with me. Astrologically, I observe Saturn is in Leo. You can go even faster. Horologically, I deduce the time is about 3:15.